Hello everybody. My name is Sharon Donovich, and I'm a product marketing manager at Kornit. And I'm happy to have you here with us in the webinar hosted by WTIN. Today we are going to touch base the pains and challenges of the fashion industry during COVID-19 that were clear. But these pains and challenges did not start now. This industry is built on a very complicated and long supply chain. And in this webinar, we would like to look into the trends that are leading the fashion industry and how fashion brands are and manufacturers are and supply chains are going to change their plans after COVID-19. I'm having here with me today three distinguished panelists, and I will let them introduce. We will start with you, Marte.
Hi everyone, my pleasure to be here and to spend the next hour with you. My name is Marte Hentschel. I'm the CEO at Sketch, which is a B2B sourcing platform that connects brands to manufacturers and suppliers to redesign supply chains in order to create more local manufacturing opportunities and transparency. I'm also a lecturer for CSR and supply chain management at a university in Berlin. And we are based in Berlin and Amsterdam.
Merav?
Yeah, hi everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today. And hi Marte and Karsten, Sharon, thank you so much for this opportunity. My name is Merav Zimerman, and I am the Business Development Director for Kornit Digital. I've been with the company for 6 years now. Our main goal is facilitate the transition of the market to an online model. We are producers, developers and producers of textile printing systems, and we have our own developed ink. All of our products are 100% sustainable, and we actually are looking exciting to see the shift and the transition of the market into the online kind of model that we'll talk about later today.
Karsten.
Yeah, hi, Karsten Newbury here. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer for Gerber Technology. Been with the company for about 6 years. Before that, 20 years with Siemens in different roles. High tech, different industries, involved in a lot of business transformations, and very excited to be on today. Gerber Technology, as many of you might know, is a provider of automation solutions for the flexible materials industry, so anything that's not hard goods. And we've been in the industry for 50 years, and certainly very involved in a lot of the manufacturing and development transitions here that are going on as part of COVID-19. The last couple of months I've been in charge of our COVID-19 response task force for PPE production, and engaged in a lot of discussions with brands, manufacturers, and industry organizations around the world. So looking forward to the discussion.
So I think I couldn't find a better panel to ask for insights into the heart of the fashion industry. It looks very simple when you're going into the store and buy some product, but actually it is a very complicated industry. So I would like you guys to give each one of you his or her perspective into this market. And Marte, maybe we'll start with you, giving your insights from your point of view, being so many years in this industry.
Yeah, so I'm now 1999. I started working as a freelancer in this industry, so it's roughly 20 years now. And I think it has never been a more interesting moment to really work in this industry, because the industry is yet to be disrupted. And I know we talk about disruption, it's also not a very positive term probably, but it's a ubiquitous industry, it's a globalized industry, but it's also very opaque. It's partly offline. It's pretty outdated. I mean, up for discussion, correct me, or give feedback, but it's, we sometimes call it the last analog market of global scale. And it's so interesting. It has so many potentials. And I'm pretty sure in the next couple of years, there will be some new players popping up, and we have no idea who will run us over, potentially, if we are not very aware of the multiple changes and the challenges that we have in front of us.
Merav, I know that you also looked very deep into this industry and have a lot of insights. Can you share?
Yeah, first of all, I have to agree with Marte. I think we are at an inflection point where the industry must change. There is a lot of talk about the change that's coming. I think the consumers are actually driving this change. You know, the old silk roads of the ancient textile industry, they need to change. They need to get shorter. They need to get closer to the consumer. We have to look at what consumers are asking for. They're asking for more sustainable products. They're asking us for faster reaction. They need to get immediate gratification. They're seeing something online, they want it now, and maybe tomorrow they're not going to like it anymore. So, you know, the old traditional ways, they're just not good enough for the consumers of today. And the fact that the entire, you know, development project of new collections and new garments, they cannot take months anymore. I mean, with this atmosphere that's going on, we have to look into direct-to-consumer models rather than, you know, the old-fashioned way of textile production. We have to look at, you know, smart factories that will have technologies that are producing items just in time, that they are driven by data that's coming from what consumers are talking about online, that they have to be efficient and flexible. They have to be offering customization. So all of these things, they need to happen, and they are happening. I mean, we're talking to brands, they're all seeing this, they all want to shift. But I agree with Martha, it has to happen, and I think COVID-19 will drive this change. And we're actually in Kornit, we already feel and we see the first hints of this change that's coming. And I think we're actually at a very interesting point in time with that respect.
But Karsten, do you have like insights of like the old models of, okay, we are seeing this shift, but it didn't happen until now in a large scale, right? It was it was going very, very slowly.
Well, I think, I mean, if you look at, we can all, you know, agree or disagree about whether everything that was done in the fashion industry was right or wrong. But if you look at some of the developments, they have been quite massive. Yes, the supply chain's been ripped apart. You know, you've had a lot of the low cost offshore manufacturing. But, you know, as much as we want to talk and will talk about today about how things can get better and to digitize and change, if you look at what that's fueled, it's fueled tremendous wealth and availability of product for consumers. And really, you know, with the advent of e-commerce, it's enabled this whole notion of consumers being able to get a product they want and to have it right away. Now, how that's done is what I think we need to talk about, because that's where COVID-19 has exposed all the flaws of the model. I think the what, that we made tremendous you know, advances in terms of the consumer experience and what's available. It can still get a lot better, but I think how we do it sustainably, efficiently, you know, not only looking at the lowest possible unit cost, but how to really optimize the supply chain. That's, I think, what COVID-19 is accelerating. A lot of the things that are happening, as Merav and Marta mentioned, are really have been starting out, but probably slowly and will accelerate. So the consumer centricity, you know, digitization, domestic versus global sourcing, this notion of on-demand digitization. But we'll talk more about that in a minute, I'm sure.
Yeah. So Merav, actually, can you share some like numbers of this massive industry?
Well, I think most of our audience is probably coming from our industry and are familiar with this, numbers, and they're quite scary if you think about it. The textile industry is the second highest polluter in the world in terms of water pollution and carbon emission. I mean, this is really not something new. We all know about that. But I just recently found out that last year, the industry produced 114 billion pieces of clothing. That means about 15 new garments for every person on the planet. And we are over-consuming, that's for sure. And we are seeing new companies that built their entire business model on the fact that we just cannot help but shop and keep shopping, okay? So, we're seeing companies that are shipping every month new items to their consumers, whether they ask for them or not. Obviously you can return what you got, but the overconsumption of this entire industry is troubling. We also see a major shift from the brick and mortar kind of consumption habits. The retail meltdown is shifting to online. Before COVID-19, about 15% of shopping was online for most brands, but I think now, from what I'm seeing companies reporting, we see an increase of 15 to 30% shift from brick and mortar to online, obviously because stores are closed and people just want to continue shopping. So those who have adapted fast to this trend will succeed and will overcome this crisis, and those who haven't will have a very hard time getting out of this crisis. If we look, a great example, I think Zara would be a great example of a company that reacted very fast, and just, I think it was February where they immediately launched their website and started shifting products from their store using volunteers, employees, to deliver goods to their end consumer, and basically through that they were able to stop to control the damage of COVID. But I think a lot of companies, a lot of fashion brands in this industry will not survive this crisis, and we'll talk about that.
So maybe on top of that, I know that for that you also created or did a very in-depth analysis of who are the main players, because it looks like, okay, we have Zara, we have these main players, but how does this market is actually fragmented?
Okay, so I guess, in the mind of a normal person, when you talk about fashion brands, so these names will pop to your head, Nike, Adidas, Zara, H&M. I mean, these companies have shaped the textile world, and they come to they come to our mind very easily. It's the first names that we will drop. But I think it's more interesting to look at the new types of brands that we sometimes tend to neglect, to not consider, such as the licenses, sports brands, music brands. These type of brands are very, very interesting because their lives can be hugely influenced by time and events. And these brands can emerge overnight. Like if Billie Eilish releases a song, all of a sudden her brand is the strongest one, is the one that everybody talks about. If you go into Instagram, you'll get it, your feed is full of Billie Eilish, and then the next day maybe we'll forget about her and talk about Rihanna or Ariana Grande, whoever. So I think we have to consider also the music brands, sports brands that we tend to forget that they are huge with certain audiences. Another type of brand that we have to look at are the DNVBs, which are the digitally native vertical brands, which are companies that exist on online only, that have no brick and mortar, but they exist only on online, and they control their entire supply chain. They're very agile, they're very interesting, they react very fast to consumer demand. I think we have to very carefully look at those brands and the type of customers that they attract and the kind of needs that they have. And also all the specialized brands. And again, this is the type of brand that we tend to overlook. These are companies that are emerging from different needs of different segments of the people that are growing up from, I don't know, I've witnessed a brand of elephant lovers in Thailand. Okay? It can be, thousands, hundreds of thousands of women, of people that are interested in elephants, and they have their own brand, and they're all familiar with it, but you and I will not know it. So there's a lot of interesting new models of brands that sometimes have a very short lifespan, and sometimes a longer one. But let's not fall into the ancient mistake of looking also only at Zara and H&M as fashion brands. That's I think the bottom line.
So Merav, it's clear that it's very fragmented. So I wanted to actually ask Marte about the fashion personas, because in each sort of brands that you're talking about, you will find also roles and responsibilities that we need to be familiar with, because it's inside the brand itself, it's also very fragmented. Right, Marte?
Exactly, and also the organizational models are changing very fast, according to what Merav just said. So, as discussed, this industry is very complex and globalized and segmented. If you take the potentially easiest product possible, a T-shirt, that traveled like 1.5 times around the globe with more than 30 stakeholders involved. If you have a lean system, it can be way more. And if you take one of these stakeholders, the brand, which is only a tiny little part of this entire chain, if we talk about the factories, the cotton farmers, and so on, it gets bigger and bigger. But if we take a look at the brand, you have various departments and various teams developing the product, which is design and technical department, to the merchandisers, the buyers, the sourcing managers, the supply chain managers, the quality manager, the logistics, and of course finance and HR. And this is only a tiny little part. And they represent and oversee multiple operations in a company. So it's very, very obvious that if you don't have smart systems to manage these processes, and keep in mind that it's getting more complex because we have sustainability issues, so you have to monitor that. You even have to disclose supply chain data because nobody knows who is the supplier of your supplier. I mean, we all talk about transparency, but actually it's pretty hard. I mean, asking the ones that represent brands amongst our participants today, who does know who supplies the raw materials for our buttons? I mean, that's crazy. We just don't know. So this will become more complex. So we need not only new systems and smart systems to manage data beforehand, we have to disclose and standardize, but also that means we have to collaborate on a whole new level in an organization. I mean, we all talk about lean and agile companies and new work. I mean, I come from the startup industry, so where these are kind of, sorry my French, bullshit bingo terms, but the reality is totally different. The reality is I'm still asked for the number of my fax machine. We have a whole industry that is running on paper. We have a whole industry that is managed by elderly people that hate spending time in front of the computer. We're in an industry that is organized in strict hierarchies, where information is top bottom.
Yeah, so I wanted actually to ask Karsten for to take us through this journey of the fashion apparel product And Karsten, if you'll start already describing it, should I move already to the next slide?
Yeah, sure. Why don't you show a little bit of the process? I think it's a good overview. So, I mean, what we've seen in the past in the fashion industry, and by the way, I saw a number of good questions and comments on the chat. So I think the audience is well aware of some of the challenges, some really good discussion there. Love to address that in a minute here. But, if you look at the traditional process, it's been planning driven. We have an idea. I'm a brand, I have a great idea. You have great creative designers maybe, but we come up with a wonderful product and we try to make as much of it as we can, or as much as we think we need to make, as cheap as possible. And then, in short term, we hope to sell it, right? And that process, you see it here, has been going through mostly linear steps, right? You've got some iteration, but mostly it's been linear, coming up with the design boards, the ideas, creating the patterns, maybe doing some virtual prototyping now as it's beginning, the grading, getting it moved to manufacturing with a tech pack, getting all that approved, going back and forth a million times between the manufacturer and the designers on what should be made and how. And then, and because we've got a supply chain that's far away, mostly in Asia, and a lot of the demand side is far away too, you have a lot of back and forth and it takes time. So long story short, it's been a very linear process. I think the chart outlines it quite well. I think the timelines here, frankly, are ready for the more advanced companies. If we go around and, we have tens of thousands of customers, if we ask around how long does it really take you from idea to finished product on the shelf, last year it was still about 42 weeks average, 42 weeks. So basically it takes you a year, you're guessing what your consumers need, because nobody, no matter how sophisticated your forecasting system is, nobody can predict what your customers are going to need in a year. And that's why also, research companies like McKinsey and others say that, accurate forecasting is one of the biggest challenge. And you see that, some statistics say that up to 30% of all garments made never get sold. So they end up on some landfill or something else. So I think the big challenge and what we see now is that this traditional process is being broken into a much more demand-driven view. And we can talk about that more here in a few minutes, but it really goes away from planning what you think consumers will want to only making what they actually need and ideally have ordered. And there's some interesting economics around that. It doesn't mean that all the production necessarily and development is going to go, on demand and onshore, but a more intelligent mix of production models, development models, and we'll talk about it more in a minute. But yeah, this process has been a challenge because it's slow, it's not digitally integrated, you don't have the visibility, and with that, your hands are tied. And COVID-19 has really exposed that, because the moment the supply chain breaks, to react to any kind of issues is next to impossible. It takes forever.
Right, thanks. So I want to tell the audience that we will answer questions at the end, because we have a lot to cover. So we'll try to rush to the questions as well. But I think that we wanted to touch base why this industry is so difficult to change. But I think that we will mostly answer that, why it's so fragmented, so complicated. And I wanted actually to move to the next slide and ask the three of you actually what, and we touched base this one, but I think that there is a place to elaborate. Merav, maybe start with you about the impact of COVID-19.
Well, we talk a lot in Kornit about the impact of COVID-19, but I have to say it reminds me of a famous Churchill quote. I always love Churchill quotes, but he once said, "Never let a good crisis go to waste." And I think COVID-19 was a perfect crisis for e-commerce. And you know, it's no secret that those who will be able to overcome the shift to online will survive this crisis better than others. If you add this to the significant shift that we see in consumers' preferences to sustainability, the fact that they're worried about overconsumption, that they actually force brands to move to more responsible business practices, I think this will also be a major impact on our market. We already see a drop in consumer spending on apparel, and it will result in a massive inventory buildup. And a lot of companies are already sitting on piles of inventory, and some of them don't even know how much inventory they have stuck in containers somewhere in the middle of the ocean, or stuck in warehouses and in their closed stores. So, you know, this will all, you know, the entire collection that should have been sold February to May will have to somehow get rid of it. Okay, so that's a huge impact on our market. I think the social distancing has an effect. It will drive more consumers into the digital channels, even the elderly that were never a part of the online experience. So those retailers and brands that have rushed to upgrade their e-commerce platforms, they will probably survive this crisis and, you know, come out of it as winners. Some will consolidate, I believe, and some will disappear.
I think that Marte already felt that happening actually in front of her, like in the daily experience.
Indeed, yeah, definitely. So what I find most interesting now is that the whole world is on pause, and especially the clothing industry. And when I remember the many conversations I had, so what all people had in common working in the fashion industry, no matter where in the value chain, they felt like they are part of a high-speed kind of vicious circle, right? You always run, you never come to an end. There's always like more collections, faster cycles, more travels, more conferences, more fairs, more everything. There's omni-channel marketing, there's omni-channel sales. It's not only multi, it's omni. So nobody had the chance to kind of sit back, take a breath, you know, have a conversation with the smartest people around you, investigate the best solutions out there, and rethink if this is really necessary. You know, what is the value we are adding? What is the purpose that drives us? Why should actually consumers desire and love what we give to them? Why should they come back? Why should they be our fans? Why should like future talents and employees really long for joining our teams? I mean, you know, we just had no time to think about it. And this is super exciting now. So I'm also very sad for the many really, really great companies that probably need to go out of the market, and the many individual, like really heartbreaking stories I also hear. Beside that, and that sounds probably cruel, because an entire season is like for the bin, and tons of fabrics, tons of goods that are going to be disposed. But we have a very, very unique chance to rethink and redesign. So we can do two things basically, because there's this paradox of being in a super, super, super complex industry, globalized, that needs a lot of time and a lot that is resisting change because it's so complex and never change a running system, and high speed, fast cycling, short lifespans industry. So somehow we have to match that, and we have to balance that. So we can slow down, or we can introduce smarter better connected systems, or probably the best of both.
And Karsten, I know that you at Gerber, you already like sort of reacted to all that, and you see that actually also happening in many areas.
Yeah, I mean, so first of all, in terms of COVID-19 impact, oftentimes we'd like to think of it as an event and then it's gone, right? It's not. So more and more the way we've been engaged in the crisis, we're trying to differentiate, and I would just encourage everybody to think a little bit maybe that same way, is there's during the crisis, there's emerging from the crisis, and there's post-crisis, right? And some of this comes in waves, and it's not the same in every locale or region, right? During the crisis, what we've seen is a big focus on restructuring, obviously, a lot of the impacts that Marte described. Big focus on PPE, production of personal protective equipment. And this is a great example that shows that the companies that are agile and digital today, they can pivot in a matter of days. So we've seen, for example, manufacturers that have gone from making regular clothing to masks within a week, and then it took another 2 or 3 days to start making gowns. So, and this has been very important for a lot of, at least our customers, to help address, obviously provide PPE, which is in short supply, and then secondly, keep their teams, busy and working and create some positive economic impact. But, that's been during the crisis. The emerging, what we see is a continued strong focus on cash. Every business needs to watch its money. And with that, we've seen a lot of unfortunate impacts also on jobs. But also, the forward-thinking ones particularly are looking at growth areas. Where are some of the opportunities, be it PPE or other, because, there are segments of the market that are growing like crazy right now. And, this emergence of, combining fashion with PPE, reimagining what's the new normal. One of the things we've been discussing, I know, with Kornit is, personalizing masks, giving everybody their own special flavor. So thinking through what is the new normal, and then really, what we see coming out of the crisis is driving the digital models. And that's in very simplistic terms. There is no one simple answer because it's going to be a journey. So anybody that tells you they have a special formula for you, there's some guidance. We see, obviously starting with what you really want to create as an experience for your consumer, your end customer is key. And then a little bit like Marte was saying, just sitting down and reimagining what can you change. And it's not mostly going to be a big bang. This stuff is difficult. We're not going to change decades of doing things differently. But I also saw in the chat that a lot of companies are already using digital tools for 3D virtual product development, for example. So as you pick more and more of those areas, connect the data. We're a strong believer. In the end, it's about the data and connecting the data along the supply chain. The more you do that, the more you're in control of your destiny. But I would encourage everybody to think of COVID as those phases and you're working your way through them.
Yeah, and actually I wanted us to go now is actually to understand where the fashion industry is going after. You mentioned some of the areas, and I think, Karsten, you gave us a very good split of what happened, what is going to happen now and the future. But I thought of starting with talking about the supply chain innovation that is needed in order, you mentioned the ones that are ready or could do that change very rapidly. And maybe, Marte, you can lead us through this innovation that is needed there.
Yeah, with pleasure. So what we observe already today is a massive demand for nearshoring, onshoring, reshoring. I don't want to go into details here, but producing close to market, as Karsten said, customer-centric concepts will be succeeding very fast. So they will recover more quickly from this current pandemic. And so we will see very successful business models popping up that we are not yet aware of, or we are not aware of their massive potential. And this will be dynamized through automation, because if you produce in Europe, for example, of course you have higher staffing costs, and so slowly but surely this is also getting more interesting for investors, and technologies are more available and accessible. So it's not you don't buy the machine anymore, you actually pay per use or pay per click, so 20 minutes of ironing and not buying the entire machine, which is really interesting. So what I see is a shift in service towards more service-oriented business models on the supply side, which makes technology that is not yet accessible, because you have to have trained staff, you have to have massive investment to make, this is going to get way more easy. We will see technologies such as blockchain making transparency and data management cheaper, faster, and easier to access. And we will also see artificial intelligence and machine learning supporting actually education, training, understanding, monitoring, operating, so you can actually adapt to changing markets and changing consumer needs really fast. And then, of course, the massive need for sustainability will dynamize that. So that's the very core who haven't started putting huge effort in sustainability goals is, I believe, out of the market very soon. So this is not a trend or a future topic. This is actually the very core. If you harm your people or you harm your consumers, then you will have no future. Sorry if I say that harsh, but I'm very convinced. So I mean, circular economy will play a major role. So we will have also more, let's say, closely to the market circulating raw materials. I mean, we sell 1 billion t-shirts in Europe a year. So we could endlessly reproduce what is there already. We don't even have to, in a perfect future, we don't even have to produce new materials, because there are so many.
I wanted Karsten to also give his point of view, because Karsten, you mentioned also changing also the business model and only producing after the purchase itself. So where do you see the first blocks of innovation coming into the supply chain?
Yeah, so I think it's a great question. Could be a long discussion here, but maybe a few points. You know, I think, again, I mentioned this earlier, the most important thing for any company in our mind is to really not just try to, apply formulas to the problem, right? But to say, look, here's the consumer, here's our customer that we want to serve, here's the experience we want to give them, and what's the best way to do that? So I think that's really the most important thing. If you're just trying to do on-demand because you're doing on-demand, it may not be the best thing. If you're doing plain white t-shirts and you know exactly how many people are going to buy those from you, you're probably best off making those in a very sustainable way, but as low cost as you possibly can. But if you're making a very personalized experience and product, the low cost approach is definitely worth reconsidering, and this is where these new models come into play. And I was adding a little bit here on the chat also that everybody's been so focused on the unit economics of the lowest possible cost. But if you factor in some of the things that Merav said, the things that end up in the landfills and everything else, the economics of high volume production aren't nearly as good as people think they are, right? So if you then look at only making exactly what you've sold, so you digitally develop the products, you put them online, Maybe you create a small batches and samples, which by the way can be done more efficiently, in on-demand runs without, large MOQs. Then you can really test and iterate, and then only really end up making the products that the customers need and want. So I think there's a huge opportunity for what we call on-demand, and it leverages the combination of digital product development and on-demand production of shorter runs. So a combination of digitally creating those patterns, those tech packs, digitally printing them off of white rolls like what Kornit is doing, and then making them, cutting and sewing them on demand. We've actually worked on a project with Kornit in New York City in our innovation center where we can, make shirts and dresses on demand in less than an hour. And you really, the technology is going to continue to evolve, but it's there today to give you at least some tools and options to say, okay, certain things I'm only going to make when I really have orders, and maybe it's definitely going to cost me more per unit to make them, but the margin's still going to be better than wasting a ton of product, and it's going to be faster too. So just to give you some examples of what's possible today, and we do believe that this type of digital integration again is where it's going.
So we're going to touch base now, in really few words, some of the terms that we touched base today. So I wanted just talk about sustainable sourcing. Merav, can you help us a little bit understand what is it about?
Well, it's a whole world of new technologies that have developed in the recent years to, as Marte mentioned before, the circular idea of reproducing items that have already been worn. For example, trying to wash textiles with dry processes, not consume as much water as it is done today. When it comes to printing, obviously Kornit, develops inks that are sustainable in a way that not only that it's safe to wear them because they are safe for your body and everyone can wear them, babies and everybody else, but also there is no water involved in the production process, so you don't waste any, there's no carbon emission, there's no water waste, there's no washing involved, there's no steaming. If you look at the traditional ways of producing textiles, these are no longer relevant when you see the damage that they actually do to the world. And it's interesting to see that the markets that are driving the change to a more sustainable future are actually the same ones that are heavily invested in production. Like you wouldn't believe how these people are concerned with sustainability way more than people in the Western countries where there's no production whatsoever.
Definitely. I wanted, Karsten, maybe you can give us some explanation about transparency. It's a word that I hear all the time. We talked about it, but maybe what is it about? What is the expectations?
Yeah, I mean, I think, transparency is a broad term, but, to me, it means in the end, the visibility to have information, along the supply chain and to be able to, leverage data to make intelligent decisions. So often transparency is linked with sustainability, knowing where a product was made and has it been, sourced ethically. And I think all those points are important. But for development, brands and manufacturers to make decisions, you need information along the supply chain. And also, rather than having silos of brands and manufacturers on the other side, to actually share more information with each other and really to make intelligent decisions. We do see, without mentioning names, some of the very large brands looking at their supply chain, reconsidering who their suppliers will be going forward post-COVID-19. And with a focus on more strategic relationships. So I think, a lot of the comments in the chat also say this is not going to be easy. It'll be interesting too. Everybody said, for example, with this PPE initiative, where everybody said, let's buy local PPE, but then if you buy a medical gown at $10 made domestically versus $2 made offshore, pretty quickly people change and they have budgets, and then you go back to offshore again. So this is going to be a pretty difficult process, and some of the local and domestic on-demand manufacturing is going to have to be facilitated by the specific countries and the governments with funding programs, investment programs. But I think all of us in the industry can also play a role to create the transparency, to use the digital tools, and to start redoing the processes. And Marte really said it, for that you have to take time. You have to take time out of your day-to-day grind. And COVID-19 threw a lot of people out of their regular routine, which in some ways may be a good thing. A lot of companies have realized you can work remotely, even for groups that never thought they could. So it will have an impact. It will still be a journey. But the transparency, I think it's up to all of us to collect meaningful data for every little process step we're responsible for, and figuring out ways to share it with others. I mean, you'll still have proprietary information, but the more we can share.
So I move to the next slide because it's blockchain, which is another word that I hear all the time. It's very popular, and Marte also mentioned. So can you just give us, like, before we are moving, because I know that there are so many questions.
Yeah, let's just hit it. I mean, we can hit it super briefly on blockchain. I mean, again, blockchain is a tool. It's a technology. I know there's a lot of hype around it, but it is one of those, one of the big issues you have right now with COVID-19 is the lack of trust in the supply chain. People aren't getting paid. With PPE, there are new players. Nobody knows, who to trust. And one of the very promising technologies here is blockchain that essentially acts like a digital ledger. So you can keep track of transactions. It's distributed. You don't have big banks or other intermediaries. And it's a really promising technology that will allow for establishing trust between parties. And that's really what it boils down to. So I think along with some of the other digital tools, blockchain is going to really play a role in the fashion industry going forward. And that has nothing to do with necessarily the cryptocurrencies, but much more even with the ability to have any kind of transaction and to be able to trust that the other party is who they are and that they're going to be doing what they say, because if not, there's a record.
And I think just to wrap it up before questions, so Marte, I know that you are huge into collaboration, and this is the essence of what you're doing. So just to recap everything and talking about this collaboration that will start happening in the industry.
Yeah, I think collaboration is key to manage this transition at a large scale. And so interesting enough that all those systems and organizations that are most likely will be opening up large corporate brands collaborate with small pioneers, and that's purely and truly a win-win situation. That's a winning bet. And also collaboration in teams inside organizations is a success factor for managing not only the crisis, but also redesigning business models. So from the, as mentioned, the horizontal hierarchical model with a low level of collaboration towards an end-to-end vertical scheme where designers sit together with engineers and machinery operators and line planners and simulate the best possible supply chain scenario for their product. And so it's going to be fun. We will learn a lot. We will also learn a lot from people with different mindsets, from different cultural backgrounds. It can only be beneficial.
So I wanted to give some of the questions here before we have a nice movie that is talking about the Innovation Center of Gerber and Kornit, but I know that you guys have hard stop at the end of the hour, and I wanted to have some options for answers. So, so fast fashion leads to more consumption. Don't you think more consumption is not good for sustainability when circularity is missing? So, Merav, can you maybe help us with that?
Yeah, you know, we're all in agreement here. Fast fashion has rose, I believe, 10 years ago, and it actually changed the whole world of fashion and consumption, and made us believe that if we don't buy something new every week, then we're out of style and we don't keep up with you know, modern life, and actually created a lot of damage to the planet and to our consumption habits, and actually also lower the quality of items that we wear. So there's a lot of talk. I hear a lot of brands talking now about producing less, but in a better quality, like we used to do before fast fashion. And I think the shift to the online model will also change the fast fashion model, which you know, which is done. You have to admire these companies. I mean, the way that they actually execute this model is quite amazing. The fact that they can move a new product to their store twice a week is logistically genius. Okay, but I think COVID-19 definitely raised a lot of questions about this model, and I believe that it will drive a shift away from the fast fashion, and will probably bring very interesting brands that will deliver some new concepts, new design, will drive the market for a more quality versus quantity type of market. And as Karsten said before, we are looking at a market that is driven by demand. So you buy your item first, and then you produce it. So we lower quantities. We only produce what people are buying, and we are not overproducing. And that's the most important thing.
Yeah. So actually, there is an interesting question here that I think it came from Nepal or something. That due to COVID-19, all of our markets are in trouble. So what could be a suggested strategy that they should pursue to keep the sector survive? And their e-commerce is not possible. So it's quite challenging. What would you suggest in case, you know, anything that you see how it could, you know,
which example was this? I missed which example this was.
So there is a question from Nepal, okay? From Vice President of the Nepal Kashmir Association. Mm-hmm. So for them, it's due to COVID-19, the markets are in trouble, and they are looking for a strategy to keep the sector survive. So the problem there is that there is no e-commerce is less possible.
Yeah, I mean, for the apparel industry in general, that's what I mentioned. I mean, we've seen a lot of our customers globally leverage PPE production as an opportunity to, on the one hand, help, but also to keep the manufacturing and apparel sector going. There have been really millions and hundreds of millions of gowns and masks produced that way, and that's one of the things we also at Gerber can help with. I can put a link on the chat here with the website that has access to a number of resources if you want to leverage PPE production as an apparel manufacturer or even brand with your suppliers. You can do that, and there's help and there's a lot of resources. Again, we have some a lot of free resources on our website that we can provide. So that's one way. I don't know if Marte has any other ideas.
Yeah, I think be confident and talk both to clients and suppliers and connect in strong chains. there's of course a big risk, because it's not the era anymore, or the era is, or the time is over, that there are very loyal long-term partnerships created, as I experienced when I started working in this business. So the question is, how can we establish loyal relationships to get some to make some more long-term plans that gives us some space for future investments, for also taking time and training our staff, and improving processes. So that just needs courage, that needs stable relationships, but also that needs strong leadership. So this is where it all starts. So you have to decide if you want to contribute something purposeful of value to this world and to this business. So it's basically, I mean, I know it's a very wishy-washy term, but I strongly believe in mindset shift.
So I see that Martin and Karsten, you already answered many of the panelists or participants questions, but since we are like 1 minute before the end, we will take all the questions and all the comments, we get them, and we will make sure that you guys will get them and will be able to answer the people. And we do have the information. I want to finish with this short movie that we have, and that shows the concept of microfactory. And I want to thank you, everybody, and especially my dear panelists here for the participation. And again, everybody will get the recording after the session from WTIN. And this is, I think, a very nice option to see this movie.
Where are your dance moves?
So I would like to thank everybody for joining us today. Thank you, my dear friend here in the panel, and have a great weekend.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thanks, everybody. Goodbye. Stay safe.
Bye. Thank you.
Keep safe.
Thanks.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye.